if you look at the exponential chart that I used to show people and I would ask them, what do you think this is? And they would say, I don't know, Tesla stock price. And while it did match that, it was actually the number of Mormons in the Mormon church. And it grew exponentially, in part through conversion, in part through birth rates. And Elon actually raises more money on an annual basis than the Mormon church. It is the greatest techno-utopian religion, and he is exceptionally good at it. So I massively underestimated his ability to continue to sell, or maybe I underestimated the credulity of the masses to provide the capital. I still, and I will sound like I'm absolutely crazy, but I still believe that there is massive accounting fraud, and maybe it gets uncovered one day, maybe it doesn't. There are two extremes. One view is this truly is about free speech, that this platform that he used to help build the brand through provocation, communication, accessibility with the masses, who in turn became true believers and either tithed or bought into Tesla, that then he used to borrow against, effectively either using as an ATM or mortgaging to then buy Twitter. The more skeptical or cynical view, and let's put low probability on this, is what a brilliant way to actually potentially cash out of Tesla. I mean, either he's got to sell stock to be able to finance this, and now this is an excusable one, right? So some months ago, he took it to the public, socialized it. Should I sell? If the majority of the people who aren't necessarily shareholders, right, they're just fans, think I should sell, then I'll sell, right? He didn't put it out to a shareholder vote. He put it out to a Twitter vote where he knows that his 60, 80 million plus fans are going to be like, yeah, sell, do great good with the money that you.
And he had already made the decision, right? Like the filing came out, he had already sold at that point.
But again, just like an incredible ability to be very subtle in how, I mean, he's very clever with the words that he uses and the timing of which he does it and the manipulation of the masses. It really is, in a sense, admirably artful, even though, I might criticize other stuff. So the cynical view here is he can use Tesla stock as an ATM and sell down and finance part of that $20 billion of equity. The $20 billion of equity might be a special purpose vehicle, friends, other participants that want to participate in that and just provide the equity. The $12.5 billion that is pledged, notably to your point, I think it's 20% loan to value coverage. So you multiply that times 5, you've got $62.5 billion of Tesla stock, and whatever the number of shares is, I think it's 70 million thereabout at the price that it was announced. Tesla's price has gone down, I think, 20% over the past month. When the deal was announced, it was over 1,000. Now it's 800 something. So it's not inconceivable that this could actually, drop another 20 or 30%. I think 740 or 750 or so is a break-even point where he might actually get margin called. And so there was interestingly, as people looked through the deal and the economics when it came out a day or two ago, the value of Tesla's equity dropped either because the market was looking through or possibly Elon was selling or somebody else was selling. I think by 2x the amount of the Twitter deal. So, $46 billion versus like $120 or $130 billion worth of equity loss, which has only since increased. So market doesn't love the deal. Certainly if you were a classic, governance-oriented investor, you would want somebody that's, singularly focused on, the company at hand. And then you've got the whole free speech thing, which we can talk about. A few provocative things there. The first is, I think one of the things that is most maybe admirable and attractive, certainly for people that are true fans of Elon, is two of the things that you named, which I would say impetuousness and irreverence. There's a feeling of like, I'm just going to go do this thing. And people like that sort of impulsivity about it. And then the irreverence is the very thing that we all love in our entrepreneurs, which is somebody that is looking at an institution that exists and either routing around it or breaking through, like the Kool-Aid man. They don't care about the system, right? And so I think people applaud that irreverence. I don't like the disrespect of the SEC, right? I mean, that is like blatant, but to your point, that's really the only thing, and it feels like it's a tiny slap on the not even on the wrist, on his pinky, for 20 million to him, 20 million to Tesla. But everything else, from calling somebody a pedo to he has gotten away with, right?
Yeah, 100%.
If you were to put it in a zeitgeist moment of time, it was very Trump-like, right? Trump was like, I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, and he was right. Like there was nothing that would stick to him, sort of Teflon Don. And I think that's the same sort of thing that when you are so big as a cult of personality that you're almost too big to fail. Like there's very little at this point that I actually see taking him down, unless it ends up being some weird Al Capone-like thing that they get him on tax evasion or some, weird thing. So
I just can't imagine that would possibly happen. And so, yeah, no, it's 100%. I mean, the Trump analogy is a good one, and we've talked about this before, but it is, I mean, there's so many parallels between Twitter as a platform to, willing things that would otherwise seem impossible into existence, to some level of grandeur and petulantness in dealing with critics or whatever. And it's actually a fascinating comparison between the two. And I think they clearly have been, more successful than I could ever aspire to be in their respective different domains. But it does feel like they're at all times very, very close to setting themselves on fire and being wiped off from, they're playing a very high risk, high stakes game that isn't totally thought through. And it's one of those things of, like, someone once said, do you take Trump literally or do you take him like figuratively in what he's saying? Like, what is the intent versus the thought? And for the longest time, I thought, I don't know if you ever watched the show Lost, but Lost was a television show. And I convinced myself for the first 3 seasons that they were playing this like super complicated game of 8-dimensional chess, and everything was going to tie together in perfect end. And it was like, okay, they were actually just kind of making it up as they went along.
Totally.
And that polar bear that they showed in season 1, they're actually not going to bring that full circle, right? And that's sort of the way I feel about these guys, is like, we're actually not going to be brought full circle on it. And to some extent, like, who am I to throw stones at someone that is, at least in Elon's case, Trump, I will gladly throw stones. But in Elon's case, like, the person that's willing these things, I mean, Twitter objectively has been a fledgling business, right? And I think he actually, in a brilliant, I don't know, accident or purposeful, but the product innovation that they've actually done in moving from the monolith that it was in 2016 and actually decoupling into microservices and breaking out, whatever, the feed from the DM, from the, whatever, the follower graph and all that stuff. It actually feels like it's on the precipice of experimenting and trying to figure out what actually works in an interesting way. And so hopefully he doesn't come in and totally blow it up, because I think what Kayvon or whoever the head of product is that's taken on, they've actually seemingly made up and corrected a lot of the past sins from a product standpoint. And now you see the velocity actually moving in a meaningful way. And so he might have actually timed this perfectly, and it could be a master stroke of genius. But when you hear him talk about it, it doesn't seem like he's that impressed with the rate of innovation. Clearly, this level of granularity aren't some of the inputs that are actually going into it.
Well, a few things. One, private company will need to raise capital, right? Currently not significantly indebted. This would be an enormous amount of debt. They're generating, I think, around somewhere between 600 and 900 million of operating cash flow a year.
Yep.
And so you put the interest, I think it would be like 4.5% on the deal docs on that amount of debt. And, it's basically eating all the operating cash flow. So then what do? Well, you either have to raise prices, or you have to cut costs, right? So you need more revenue and less cost. Duh. So raising prices, I think there's room for that. There is probably a power law. I would guess that 20% of users would pay significant multiple. I would pay, I don't know, what would you pay a month for Twitter?
It would be hard to come up with a price that I couldn't talk myself in, like, unless it got so high that other people weren't on the platform, right? But to get some advanced, I don't know, analytics on followers and some likelihood that, hey, at least this many people that follow you are going to see this post and whatever. There's a bunch of power user kind of tweet deck functionality that would be nearly infinite in my willingness to pay, assuming other people stay on the platform.
Right. Definitively a multiple of $3, right? Would you pay 30? Yes. Would I pay 100?
Probably.
Yes. Would I probably, so I don't know, $1,200 a year, and as a professional, like, it's sort of a no-brainer, right? I mean, I think about what I pay for cable and the utility I get of just consuming something versus being able to produce and push out to an audience. So I think that there's pricing power, and I think that there's probably pricing power on a few different fronts. Individual subscribers, paying users, members. I think that there's opportunity for corporates. You might even have a messaging element there akin to Slack for some elements of newsworthiness, timeliness, that's siloed in their own sort of corporate DM channel that you could at least get corporates to pay for, whether or not they'd actually use it, TBD. And then I think you can actually do it by verticals where, you could actually sell advertising to specific verticals around sports. And you start to see this a little bit with the group segment being rolled out. But there's a ton of ways to monetize and experiment. And I don't think that they will piss people off enough that people will abandon the platform entirely. It's just too valuable. And then on the cost piece, it's really just going to come down to headcount. And that's the stuff where are you going to be able to keep morale in a culture where, on the one hand, if you look at Elon's other companies, SpaceX, super high performing, super high intensity, the people that are coming out of there and some of the entrepreneurs that we're backing, they might have started at SpaceX, they were 25, they've been there 5-6 years, they're 30, 31 now. They're coming out, I mean, they're lights out, they're awesome. A lot of people that work at Tesla, it's just like some of them are like abuse victims, right? Coming out and they're just like, coming into 12-step programs. So the culture under Elon, unless he taps somebody to, maybe he becomes chairman and finds some amazing CEO, which itself is a question of like, if you were in charge of picking a CEO for this company, who would it be? I just think that you're going to have a lot of panic internally, and maybe the people who are morally panicking because they're too far on the left or something are going to, self-select themselves out. So one extreme is he truly is a First Amendment free speech advocate, cares deeply about conjecture and criticism, the two necessary ingredients, for true intellectual progress, and for the preservation of institutions that support those things. And he's a great champion of the First Amendment. The other alternative is that it's a convenient, and the other extreme is it's a convenient excuse. Obviously, I have my biases, and I lean that it's closer to that. I think, I think he does not like being censored by the SEC or having to have the proverbial Twitter sitter. I think he'd like to be able to say whatever he likes without with impunity. But this is somebody who has a history of silencing critics. I mean, there are not like one or two or three, but like dozens of examples where he has gone hard after people. In some cases, they were anonymous. In some cases, they were not. But, gotten them fired, threatened litigation. Guy said that he thought it was a PR stunt, and he, called him a pedophile, right? And just you could say, well, that's free speech, countering free speech. But, there's other examples where he went after people's bosses and said, your guy's writing blogs criticizing my company. There's this old quote that the truth doesn't mind being questioned, and a lie doesn't like to be challenged. And so I am very skeptical about Elon suddenly having this transformation of I really want open criticism, and to invite it. I think he abhors criticism and critics. The second part of this is Twitter's sort of the ultimate platform that if you don't want to listen to somebody or you don't want to hear a word, you mute them or you unfollow them or you block them. Yep. So the greater risk arguably is that people have put themselves into silos and, in information echo chambers and let information cascades occur in not exposing themselves to alternative views. But that's also a measure of free speech, as you get to choose. I'm not forced to watch Fox if I don't want to, or MSNBC or CNN. You listen to who you want and you expose yourself to who you want. That's a personal choice. So I find it to be just, absolute, I don't know, at times, I guess, who's the Garden of Earthly Delights? Hieronymus Bosch. At times it's like that. There's just like this chaotic orgy of like both brilliant intellects and just toxic stuff, but you sort through it, and you discount the really ugly stuff and you ignore it and you pay attention. And I've just found some of the smartest people on Twitter, some of the the Russia-Ukraine phenomenon, like real-time reporting, the analysis, the insights from people globally. It's just been absolutely incredible.
I can't decide, I think this is it's certainly one of the most interesting things that I imagine we'll encounter in our lifetime in terms of just like business spectacle personalities. He literally 2 days ago tweeted a cocaine joke about putting cocaine back into Coca-Cola, right? And so it's like it's constant entertainment. It also feels like there's a materiality here that you almost can't talk about it enough in terms of how fascinating it is, how important it is as a platform, how interesting the story and the machinations of it are, how the outcome, I'm still not totally sure which way it's going to go, right? It's just like, you actually couldn't make all this up.
Well, he is the embodiment of and I think it was like the internal survey, it was like, like 40% of people or whatever, 30% of people didn't really care one way or the other, 27% loved him, 27% hated him inside of Twitter, right? Which itself you would have thought. But it's like loved, hated, never ignored. And he is the embodiment of that. And what's interesting is Trump used to consume that, right? And people were like almost exhausted from the constant need for love, hate, adoration, attention. And, right now there isn't a day that goes by. And it actually is sort of marvelous. Like, you've got SpaceX launching astronauts, you got him doing Twitter thing, you got Tesla reporting record profits. Like there isn't a day right now in this current moment where it isn't, Elon all the time. China and Elon is an element that I have not really seen talk too much. I mean, Bezos actually tweeted sort of one of these like, interesting, alluding to it. But the relationship with China is very significant. I don't know this for sure, but I've heard from a reliable source, he is one of the few foreigners, maybe the only, with Chinese citizenship. I don't know if that's been verified, and I don't know if that was like a precursor to receive something or other, but he produces half of Tesla's vehicles there. Half of Tesla's vehicles are produced in China. A quarter of its revenue comes from China. China has banned Twitter.
I mean, clearly neither of us are totally pro
Unbiased,
Elon, Twitter. This is good. I'm not on the other end of that side. I don't know that it's bad. I think Twitter has floundered for a long time, and I think this could be a brilliant move. If I were thinking from a pure capital allocation standpoint and I were Elon, this is a masterstroke of like diversification that I really respect. And so in that case, like, I don't know inherently that this is a bad thing. That said, the most ardent people that I'm sure you follow on Twitter, that I follow on Twitter, that are championing this deal for free speech are also very anti-China, right? And will say things about anyone that invests in China, will call out anyone that caters to China in any meaningful way, right? All the social apps, TikTok, and everything that are Chinese owned or managed, right? And so that is interesting dichotomy of how do you reconcile those two things? Like Tesla as a business is, as you mentioned, very rooted to China. This is, it's clearly, if Elon has all these ties there, right? Clearly someone that is rooted in China now has the town square, as Bezos tweeted. And so I don't really have an opinion about that other than to say, it's another interesting subplot in this. I feel like I'm kind of mealy-mouthed on both sides of it because I'm like, oh, this is cool. It's interesting he was able to do this. I also think he has a loose relationship with the facts, but he's entertaining sometimes. I don't happen to think 420 jokes are funny, but like, I kind of respect someone out there is doing that.
By the way, I don't think he thinks it's funny either. I think he knows that it is catnip for an entire demographic, and he's just been brilliant at audience building. Does he love anime? Maybe. Does he know that there's a segment that loves anime? Definitely.
Well, I have a feeling we're not going to stop talking about like this is going to be. I don't know when I'm still sort of convinced if I could get 5-to-1 odds with that 80% likelihood of closing, and someone said, "Hey, whatever, here's $100, and I'll give you 5-to-1 odds," it doesn't. I still think it's going to fall apart in some way, shape, or form. But I've also been wrong. Like my track record of betting against Elon, I think at this point is 100% wrong.
Okay,
so
right.
if someone were to look at the statistical relevance of me not believing,
here's a broader question, which is applicable to many companies. Gurley would say that it's really important that companies go public, right? Because they have to stand. I mean, it's the same sort of thing if you actually care about free speech, by the way.
Yep.
You want conjecture in the public square so that it can be criticized, and you need both sides, right?
And this is Bill Gurley, partner at Benchmark, for people that don't know, a friend of Josh's, someone else that I hold in great respect. So yeah, and he would say that companies should go public because it forces them to really hold themselves accountable to an accountable public. When you take a company private, you can say one of two things: either A, you can get out of the scrutiny of short-term shareholders and you can focus on the long-term. It is a question, and I don't know that there is a right answer, but you have a company at one end, which is the antithesis of Tesla, which is like Berkshire Hathaway, yep,
where he is out in the public. You see everything that they're doing on both their public market purchases and their private market companies, the logic behind why he's purchased them. And so there's nothing really there in the shadows. I mean, maybe some of the backroom dealings about these deals, they get done very quickly. But Twitter being public is interesting because management, on the one hand, needs to make sure that its shareholder base thinks it's doing a good job. We're in this weird moment, and I think the moment started 12 years ago with the Social Network, the Sorkin movie, that then preceded by 2 years Facebook's IPO and a decade-long bull run, the likes of which, frankly, anybody since 2007 who has not really lived in a downturn, so anybody that's 22 to 37 years old coming out of college in the past 15 years, has not seen massive down rounds, rifts, reductions in force, layoffs, a downturn. And so now we have these shows all produced, in the past 6 months, all running at the same time right now. Super Pumped on Uber, We crashed on WeWork, inventing Anna about the sort of fraudulent socialite, the dropout on Theranos, and there'll be a bunch more, right? But it feels like it is art imitating life, imitating art, that we are suddenly of a moment or a zeitgeist where that tide, as you say, is coming out and everything is starting to be reported. And now the zeitgeist starts to change and people start thinking, my God, we are like in the golden age of fraud. And so I think that there's going to be just massive litigation everywhere you look. There's going to be lots of bad morale and bad news. Shoes are going to drop. And I think in our business, you are going to go from entirely founder-friendly VCs tripping over themselves to just get allocations to suddenly people saying, well, let's do a flat round, or an extension of the last round on the same terms. Meanwhile, revenue or fundamentals might have doubled, which basically means you're doing it at half the valuation that it was before. And then people are going to say, no, I think we got to, get some kicker that is an inducement for participating investors as an extra reward. So maybe there's some warrants, just some extra liquidation preferences, so that those investors, get more money back in the event that it doesn't work out, or in the event that it does. And then you'll start to see pay-to-play rounds, and they'll start nominally putative 2-to-1 conversion, 5-to-1 conversion, then 10-to-1 conversion of non-participating investors. So I think things are going to get ugly. I think that people will get a lot of losses and a lot of education.
I mean, maybe I'm ignorant in this, and some people intend, like the fraudulent example that I lived through in 2014. I don't think he woke up and said, "Hey, let me start a Ponzi scheme," or like, "Let me lie in my books." And I don't think Bernie Madoff. I don't know. I haven't analyzed him psychologically, but I think what happens is everything starts so small, right? And it's like, hey, this customer's closing the day after the board meeting, but if they close the day before, that would just be so much better, right? And then they don't close that next day, and now and then it slips, and then they never sign up, and they're like, well, but I got so much validation from that, and honestly, I think they're going to come back around, right? And then it just leads to this little web of like toothpaste only goes one way out of the tube, right? And you have to come back and come clean with it, and it just spirals. And so I think we're going to see a lot of these different things on where you get caught in the flywheel, and like at what point we catch it, right? Some of them are probably going to be just like very small and they never get spoken about, and they have to restate their revenue, and maybe the board loses trust in the CEO and CEO quietly bounces, right? And you never hear anything about it. At the scale of Theranos, especially with the health implications of that, I hope we don't see another one of those, but there's definitely a lot of this stuff going on. And it's going to be interesting as as future funding rounds get held contingently.
If you worked in banking, in capital markets, in M&A, if you are a lawyer involved in cleanup, distressed, bankruptcies, debtors in possession, like I just think that segment is going to be lit up in a really positive way, unfortunately, for the next 2-3 years. It's what happened during the dot-com boom bust. And then you had a wave of people from 2000 to 2002 or 3 that were just all focused on M&A consolidation, cleanup, distress, people dropping in as interim CEOs, boards cleaning stuff up, litigations left and right, inside companies, between the board and shareholders, between shareholders and the CEO, just trying to reclaim, to your point, the sense of inequity and fairness when people walked away with money undeservedly.
This is how, so the tragedy of Twitter is that the world kind of runs on Twitter, even though the world doesn't necessarily use Twitter. Twitter is a connectivity source. It's how news spreads, and a lot of people get the benefit of that network without even ever needing to be a part of it, right? And when I look at Twitter, I think about the most passionate and experienced people in every topic are deeply engaged with this product. It's how they learn from each other. It's how they share ideas, etc. And yet, it's not a topic-centric platform. Up until only recently, you used to curate your own timeline, and the first mile experience was all about finding a few people to follow. And still to this day, I think it matters more how many followers you have on Twitter than how credible you are in a particular topic that you're commentating on. And I think that's the source of a lot of the problems we have in the world these days. From and it also within Twitter specifically, because people can just amplify whatever headline or fake news article happens to jaunt their interest. And, of course, Twitter now makes us read an article, or at least suggests that we read an article before sharing it. But I don't think that's a long-term solution. And, I'm sure you'd agree. If you're in a democracy, if you're in a country like ours that is kind of been defined and saved a number of times by the principle of free speech. Like, let's rise to the occasion and enable that. And I just think, though, that with the kind of the lubrication effect of social technology and how easy it is to see something from anyone, it's a bit of a Times Square or a town square on steroids. There need to be product solves for us to digest all that. In a town square, like if someone crazy comes over to you and starts telling you something fake, hopefully there's someone around you who's like, actually, it's just that one person that's telling you this, and we all disagree, right? And actually, I'm the expert, and I'll tell you why that's wrong. But it's harder to have that happen, in the digital world. And I think we're seeing that at scale. That's a product solve. That's a design solution, in my view. And I'm excited by that, actually. I have no idea what Elon Musk's mentality is going into this, but if I, were in his shoes, I would want to deeply understand, what the team's vision is. And I'd want to challenge them on the parts of the product that I'm most frustrated with and measure my degree of confidence in both the solution underway, as well as the people leading those solutions, right? And when you have real confidence in those people and you have real confidence in the vision and strategy, then it's like, okay, how do I unlock this for you? Like, how do I clear the path? What resources do you need? What mandate do you need that you don't currently have to achieve it? And when you don't have confidence in the people or the vision or strategy, you jump in, get your hands dirty and course correct. So I hope he takes that listening tour, right? And because he's inheriting, this amazing product that obviously all of us love so much that we even care to have podcasts and always constantly critique it on the platform itself. So that is undeniable product value right there. And, I hope he takes that approach. And, he's a smart guy, and he seems to have a good knack for attracting talents and empowering talents. So I'm actually hopeful. I mean, listen, my biggest strength and weakness is optimism. I'm always like, I have faith that people will, find the right direction and find like the muster to make it happen. And, I just want Twitter, though, to remain as valuable, if not more so, than it's been for all of us, because it is in some ways a unique communally owned product, right? We all feel some degree of ownership for some strange reason.